You're listening to the Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare. This year, 14 cyclists have died on London's roads. 9 involved lorries. Critics say Transport for London isn't doing enough to make the roads safe whilst encouraging more people to cycle. Joining me around the table for a debate on cycling in London is James Moore, Associate Business Editor at The Independent and a victim of a tragic cycling accident that left his mobility impaired. Dr. German Dector-Vega, Sustrans Director for London, and Michael Hodges, Executive Editor at Time Out, London's magazine. James Moore began by sharing his experience with us.
I was cycling home from, ironically, an appointment with a physio who I see rather a lot of these days. And it was between Stratford and Leytonstone. I was on a cycle path and a lorry turned left into me and rolled over me, leaving me with a broken pelvis, left hip and fib, most of my ribs, collarbone, arm smashed up, elbow and a toe, and severing my sciatic nerves, which has been, I think that they gave me less than a 50% chance of living when I turned up into the hospital, so it was a very narrow escape for me. I narrowly avoided becoming one of those statistics, if you like.
Now, you're sitting here, Michael Hodges, Executive Editor, Time Out, and you've written a lot about cycling in London, for and against. Where do you stand on the role that cyclists have, and having heard, the statistics of the number of deaths and James's experience here in front of you?
Well, where I stand primarily, the first thing I would say is all other problems pale into insignificance compared to the fact that people are being killed. So my starting point is we have to stop the killing, and the not just the killing, the lifelong injuries that that James has suffered. So that's my starting point. At the same time, in a city of so many people trying to do so many different things, there are problems, and that caused by cycling, or not by cycling. It's caused essentially by driving. There's a knock-on effect. Drivers force cyclists off the roads, and you understand why after you hear what happened to James, and onto the pavements. And for me, a city is essentially a place to have a cultural and intellectual engagement with the people and the buildings around you. And I think if you lose that engagement, the ability to dawdle, to look above your head, to walk along not doing much else but thinking, makes London so fascinating, and if you have to stop doing that because someone's tearing down the street on a racing bike, and because it usually is the professionals, the couriers that are the worst offenders, then I think we've got a problem. It's not a problem that compares to the problem of people being killed, but I do think that ordinary Londoners are suffering in other ways that I would quite like to fix.
Dr. Herman Dector-Vega, you're the Sustrans Director for London. What next for the city? What is a solution? It needs to be safe. We need to stop the killings, but there needs to be a role for pedestrians. What's Sustrans' involvement in this?
So it's quite interesting. We cover quite a lot of transport modes, if you want. So we promote sustainable transport, which includes walking and cycling. I think the advantages of walking and cycling as such is that they can really solve the problems of the city. The city is growing. It'll keep growing like mad. And there's only very few options you have in terms of moving people around. You can invest millions on the underground, which sometimes is justified. You can build roads and it'll get you nowhere. You'll become like Houston, Texas. It's not a pretty city. Nice people, but not a pretty city. Or you can invest very effectively on walking and cycling. And that is a huge challenge. It's something that we hadn't done before, and it's just happening now. And yeah, there are certain issues that need to be resolved. First and foremost, the safety issue. And when you have something as specific and the statistics are so clear, that's a huge problem with HGVs. we need to have ambition. We need to resolve it quickly. And the other thing is that people need to abide by the rules of the road and look after each other. We tend to say to people, when you see somebody doing something wrong, it's probably not a cyclist, it's a person on a bicycle, and that person is probably going to behave in the wrong way if they're driving, if they're on the bus, if they're on the tube. So basically, somebody that's not very polite on a bike is going to be not very polite in every other mode, and that needs to change. So we need to take care of each other, I think.
But we've got James here who was on a cycle lane. We've got a fair argument that cyclists shouldn't be on a pavement. You work for a charity that promotes cycling as a sustainable way of getting around a city. There doesn't seem to be anyone talking to each other or working this out. And HGVs are disproportionately more responsible for the number of cycling deaths. I wrote to Boris Johnson and asked him, why are you not banning HGVs in rush hour? I cycle, and I have to say that I am probably more worried disproportionately each morning from seeing the lorries.
There are two points I'd like to make on that issue. The first one, as regards the issue of pavement cycling, and the problem for a cyclist is a cyclist doesn't have a space at the moment. I did see the other day, commendably, we had the first walled-off cycle lane, which was an absolute specific cycle lane where a car couldn't go because there were pylons, and that's the first of that in London. But the problem is, at the moment, other cycle lanes, they don't have any legal force. The cycle lane is not the cyclist's space in the way that the road is the car space and the pavement is the pedestrian space. So I think one of the first things which need to be done is put a bit of force behind cycle lanes. If you're going to create cycle lanes and say to cyclists, this is your space, then back it up with legal force. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I say when it comes to heavy goods vehicles is what really annoys me about about good HGVs is you'll see on the back of a lot of them these yellow things saying, cyclists, stay back, don't pass me on. Now, that's great, isn't it? Because you've got a sticker on the back and the lorry driver thinks, well, I don't need to worry, I don't need to look, I don't need to care about a cyclist because, look, there's a sign on the on the back of my truck saying, don't go anywhere near me or I'll hit you because I can't see you. To me, that is not good enough. I see one of those signs on the back of a truck when I'm driving in my car, and it makes my blood boil, because there are relatively inexpensive £500, £1,000, which in the context of the cost of a truck is not a lot, and the context of a death is minimal, because they would cut deaths. Because I think I saw a figure somewhere saying £250,000 is something like the cost of every death, not to mention the cost that's on the NHS of treating me. Now, £500, you put a sensor in, it alerts the lorry driver when there is a cyclist in his blind spot. Easy. So my answers are twofold. Give cycle lanes legal force, make it the cyclist space, and put the sensors in the truck so they know that the cyclists are there, and get rid of these ridiculous yellow signs which just make me angry.
When I see them, I cycle around them and go in front of the lorry, and I always look back to try and get some level of eye contact. It's the only way to feel in any way safe. Your argument, Michael, is London is for Londoners, and that intellectual space, and it's not the sort of exercise routine going to work on the bike.
I think, we're talking about legislation. Again, I just want to be very careful here not to appear flippant about people's lives being lost. But I am a passionate defender of the right to not do much in cities other than enjoy them. I think that's key to. It's why I'm obviously not from London, and moving here has been a life-changing and wonderful thing. And I've seen London. Obviously, cities change, but we're losing quite a lot of the good things. Just sitting on a train and looking out the window or reading is a pleasure we've all lost now, because the person next to you will be speaking into their mobile, or their headphones will be leaking. So we're gradually eroding these chances to be contemplative in London and quiet. And but obviously we can legislate for certain things. You could legislate for vehicles carrying sensors. You could legislate for cycle lanes being walled off. you can increase the fines for bad driving or indeed for bad cycling. But you can't legislate attitudes. And I know you said a little earlier that one thing we're not doing, the different camps, if you will, is talking to each other. And actually, that's quite a profound thing to say, because we're not actually. The people that complain about cyclists tend to complain with each other. People or in organisations like Sustrans tend to some degree to speak to the converted for no fault of their own. And of course James isn't going to join me in the pub going on about bloody cyclists. So if we could find a way in London of coming together a bit more on this, I would be very pro doing that.
And I think the trick is to normalise cycling. I completely agree. We are preaching to the converted, and now we need to preach to the non-converted and do what the Dutch do. The Dutch are very smart at this, and the reason why people talk to each other and the reason why the environment is much better is because everyone knows everyone is a cyclist there, pretty much. Whether they're driving, whether they're on a HGV vehicle, they are cyclists at some point of their life, or at some point of the week even, and so they know how to deal with things. And so we need to normalise it. And just to answer a bit what you're saying, after the Olympics we actually seen the opposite. Cycling used to be dominated by 25 to 44 males, very physically able, in employment, very wealthy. That's changing very quickly, and now we're seeing a lot more women, a lot more ethnic minorities. We need to go even further. We need to get all the population, children. We start seeing more people on the roads. There's this critical mass where people will take them seriously as a cyclist, and then all those people as well will be ambassadors for cycling when they're doing. And again, it's the same thing with HGV vehicles. I think there's a huge number of things. I agree with James on all of them. It's ridiculous that we have this massive trucks that pretty much look like tanks in a city like London. It's so difficult to navigate. I feel for the drivers in a way as well. That's such a difficult job with such a horrible vehicle, and I'm sure nobody wakes up in the morning thinking I want to kill someone. So, but I think there's a health and safety issue that people are not facilitating the drivers to do the job properly. It's not very well regulated, and we're not prioritising it, as James says. So I would go even further, and what you said, Berlin, Dublin, the whole of Germany actually, they ban HGV vehicles at certain times of day or certain times of the week. It is possible, it just needs the will. And what we keep saying to the freight industry is, we want to work together with them to do something along those lines to protect everyone. If they can do it, great. If they don't do it, it'll come the point when it will have to be legislated and they won't have a choice. And I'm sure they don't want that.
I'm sure, James, though, that you probably don't have as much sympathy for the drivers of HGV that Herman then mentioned there. What was your experience going through the sort of the court?
I mean, the court is my experience going for the court would be pretty similar to anyone's. It's an impersonal experience. You are stuffed away in a witness room. You don't really feel that you want to leave the witness room or visit the canteen. Fortunately, there was one of the witnesses who'd witnessed my accident was there, and he had a car there, and so we were able to go out and get a bacon sandwich up the road. But it's very impersonal. The prosecutor who was handling my case picked it up that morning, didn't call the witnesses who turned up, and I was sort of, pretty cynical about the whole thing. I would like to actually just address Michael's point a bit about the city, because I like that. I agree with Michael. This is a wonderful city in many respects. It is great that you can have a city just to wander around in. You should be able to just amble around aimlessly on a path. You should also be able to bike, slowly on a cycle, which is a marvellous way of seeing the city, and just another way of doing it. So give us a space, give everyone the space. The pavement is for the pedestrians, the cycle lane is for the cyclists, and the road is for the vehicle. If everyone's got a space, then it's shared properly. And why you're getting conflict at the moment is that the cyclist doesn't have a space, and they're trying to fit in between a bus and a path. And a friend of mine, I was talking to him the other day, and he said, well, I'm really sorry. I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I got up on the path at one particular point in London, which is a really dangerous point. He said because I was scared. Mm. Now you might argue that perhaps he should have got off the bike and walk, and perhaps But on the other hand, he should have somewhere that he shouldn't have to feel scared of being on a cycle. You should have a facility to enable him to cycle safely. We have encouraged people to cycle in this city. We have Boris bikes now. Now, I think it'd be quite hard to hit anyone on a path in a Boris bike. They're built like a tank, and I've never used one, but I can't imagine you can get up a particular speed on one of them. They are sort of slow commuter things that you sort of amble along. But, you know, we have a policy. We've had a policy directive in this city to encourage people to cycle, to get more people on cycling, because it relieves the tube, it's environmentally friendly, it takes people off the roads, and so on and so on. And yet we've done that without creating the facilities for cyclists to do that safely. And this goes back to my argument that if we're having a city for everyone and we need to share it, the cyclist needs to be given a space, really, because it's just not tenable, the current situation where you have the pavement and the road, and both of them are dangerous.
Why isn't London listening? You know, Sustrans, as a pressure group,
we go to a lot of effort into working with other people heavily. We work with the freight industry, for example, as much as we can. We work with living streets and pedestrian associations. We work with TfL. We work with local authorities. We speak to community groups. We have a very strong community engagement process. This is cyclist and non-cyclist. We speak to motorist groups as well. So we are speaking to each other, and I think there's a lot of progress happening. The other thing that we do quite a lot is, especially in the case of London, I'm trying to make the case for cycling as a very efficient mode of transport. Forget about the green arguments and the health arguments that we all know about. Is if the city is interested in investing in cycling, they've got to see the point that it is a mass mover. It is a mass mover. It is the most efficient way of moving around the city. So if they invest on making it safer, more convenient, so on and so forth, not only us will win as users, as Londoners walking around, cycling around, but the city will see huge benefits, huge cost savings, rather than build an extra carriage on the Jubilee line that costs £600 million. With that money, you can segregate pretty much the whole of central London. It's not unfeasible. It's absolutely possible. So there is a lot of progress, and there's lots happening. We are talking to each other. There is the willingness. And we are reaching a wider demographic. The key to unlocking cycling in this city is getting people that don't see cycling to see it. Everyone is a cyclist. Even if you don't ever cycle, you know somebody that cycles, you have friends that cycle, or if you're a driver and you're never going to cycle, one cyclist on the street, it's one less person on the road, less congestion. So it benefits absolutely everyone. I completely agree with James's point that needs to happen with the right provision, with the right designs, with the right engineering, with the right political priority, and with the right investment.
Where would you like this debate to go? Because I think we've come to the not conclusion, but we agree that actually everyone needs to talk to each other, and everyone has a role. And you've got quite a good role with Time Out, because you distribute to a lot of Londoners.
I can tell you something about Time Out. If I write about cycling, pardon me, there will be and invariably also is a huge response, and it won't also be a calm response, and people get very, very agitated. And I can only compare it in the past to writing about Palestine and Israel. That's the kind of response you get from people on either side, you know, and they call you the strongest thing. So yes, there's a hell of a lot of feeling out there, and I mean, I don't think my job is to, you know, I don't think a journalist's job is to fix things. That's for politicians, isn't it? And going back to an earlier point, we were talking about that Johnson's administration has actively encouraged cycling. Well, to actively encourage cycling without providing the infrastructure around it that makes it safe strikes me as potentially an irresponsible thing to do, though I'm sure he would argue it wasn't. But my worries are something else we haven't hit upon today also is that there's a social class issue here as well. Cyclists on the whole are middle class. You have to be to afford the bicycle, you know. And the the people using pavements who are most vulnerable are the old people, small children, the infirm to some degree, people who aren't in the middle strata of society quite often. And to me, there's a real conflict there between, to some degree, the haves and the have-nots, which just, to me, seems to just add to the burden of being at the bottom of the pile, which is tough enough already in London. And also, we haven't talked about gender that much as well, and I think you look at a lot of the bad things that happen in society, it's quite often men between 15 and 30 who are doing them, and I guess, I know Herman interestingly said that the profile's changing a little bit, but I think on the whole, in most people's experience, if you encounter an aggressive, rude and dangerous cyclist, it's not going to be a 72-year-old lady from Bangladesh who's just been introduced to this, it's going to be a 22-year-old guy, with a sense of he's more important than anyone else. And we all know the type, and I'll probably walk.
But you'll get that on the roads as well.
I was going to say, it's the same as driving. Yeah.
We're talking about bad cyclists here. Driving standards in London are appalling. They really are bad.
Yeah.
I was up in Liverpool the other week, and it was remarkable how you're in a city you've never been into before. You feel a bit of trepidation. But within a very short order of time, in Liverpool, I was pretty relaxed driving about there. The standard of driving was streets ahead of what I encounter every day in London.
Do you mean it's politer?
It's politer, yeah. It's
and
politer.
That's the difference between London and any capital city or hugely busy city. New York's rude, London's rude, in Paris, well, isn't hugely successful, but it's still rude, isn't it? And I know we were talking earlier about the Dutch example. Well, that's all very well for Amsterdam, but what happens in Amsterdam?
But it doesn't.
People are rude and in a hurry here for a reason.
People are rude and in a hurry for a reason, but it's causing a problem, and it's something we're going to have to deal with eventually, because people are getting killed because of it. People are getting killed because
often those HGV drivers,
because people are rude and in a hurry. You have a problem as a motorist, and I am now a motorist and not a cyclist, and I will still take the cyclist's cause, even though I am a motorist and not a cyclist. Because I would like to be able to give cyclists space. I would like to be able to, when I'm driving my car, to drive it with consideration for people who are cycling, because they are much more vulnerable than me. If you are in a car, a bad driver can hurt people and kill people, and they will kill pedestrians as well. Your point is about the people at the bottom in society who have to use the pavements. Well, they are also the people who are getting run over and hit on London's pavements. I know people who have been hit, pedestrians who have been hit because of bad driving, and so it's not just good enough to say we are a capital city and everyone's rude in a capital city, because it's killing people. And you cannot, give cyclists the space and time they need in this city because of the way people drive in it. Yeah. That needs addressing.
One of the characteristics of all the cities that are successful in terms of cycling is that speeds are much lower and people drive better. Yeah, I completely agree. And to me, it's about changing the social norm. And there's parallels to this. So if you go to, I come from Mexico City. If you try to take the underground in Mexico City, everybody pushes you pretty bad. It is pretty bad. There is no social norm of that. You come to this city and the underground here is as busy as the Mexico City one, if not more. Sorry. But people don't push. And you notice it straight away when you first come to the city, and people even make jokes about it. The tube being crammed, people still giving space to each other and saying sorry for touching your elbow. Oh, I'm so sorry. There's a social norm there, which is fantastic. If we can transfer that to the roads, it'd be absolutely amazing. And what you talked about, the social norm, you're absolutely right. There's a very interesting parallel example there as well with the buses. The buses used to be that thing that weird people used to drive. If you watch an American film, there was always a weirdo on the bus. It is claimed that Margaret Thatcher said that a man that is on his 30 and still on a bus is a failure in life. Some people say she didn't. And now buses are the best bus network in the world is in London. The 5-year-old is the oldest bus. They're immaculate. They're pretty clean. They've got lots of space for prams and people with mobility impairments. They're absolutely wonderful. And nobody attaches it anymore to a social stigma. We need to do that with cycling. Simple enough. And you're right, there's not enough people out there diverse enough to say, right, cycling is normal for the city, so live with it, sort of thing. Give them the space, don't rev at them, don't shout at them, behave, sort of thing.
And when you said, Michael, back, we didn't touch on gender, but there's also the gender issue that women are actually disproportionately more likely to be killed on the roads.
And as I understand it, that's because they are proportionally more likely to obey the rules, aren't they?
Yeah, and they
often,
stay
you know?
they stay within a lot closer to the gutter on the inside and are less aggressive, which is why they don't cycle round.
Yeah.
But there are available training schemes in the city, and there just seems to be, yes, the legislation needs to change, and politicians need to do that. London Mayor Boris Johnson needs to think about encouraging cycling and making sure that the city can cope with that. But this change in mentality, this is where we've all agreed needs to change. How can that happen?
It is hard, and it needs to be at every single level. So it's starting from strategic level and politicians making the point. But what we do is we work with grassroots. We have quite a number of training programs. We have a lot in Tower Hamlets, for example. We work with parents. It's very easy. It's very difficult to address people that don't cycle, because obviously they're scared of doing it. One of the ways we do it is through children. We work training children to cycle and providing safer routes for children to cycle, not only showing them how to cycle. And when a child goes to his parent and says, "I want to cycle with you," the parent immediately turns around, and we go and teach parents how to cycle properly. And the beauty of it is that once parents start cycling, most of them are also drivers. Most of us are also drivers. So they start to see the other side of the coin. It takes a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of years, but we're getting there. London's got probably one of the biggest education programs with children, and it's quite holistic. It's not only teaching them how to cycle, it's teaching them how to select routes with their parents, embedding a cycling culture, also how to be respectful on the road, what the rules of the roads are, making them aware of the dangers, so on and so forth. Transforming a generation. That's what the Dutch did. That's what we need to do. It'll take 20 years, but let's keep going.
James, final word from you.
I guess if it's a plea for just generally on the roads is it might sound sort of slightly airy-fairy or whatever. Just a little bit of politeness. A little bit of just, and this it can apply to cyclists as well. If you are you're not actually going to save much time by being in a hurry. Frankly, we've all been in a car and had someone race past us, and they're stopping at the same lights, and you're right behind them in 2 seconds. They did something on Top Gear of all places, which I'm not a fan of, but I did watch it once. And they had one of their presenters do something that they called, quotes unquote, Christian driving, which means they let people in when there was an opportunity to do so. And they obeyed the speed limits and just drove with an exaggerated politeness. And it cost them a matter of seconds, a couple of minutes at the end of their journey. Now, if you can translate that into more people doing that, you would have a safer city. And I don't believe just because the city is rude, that doesn't mean to say you can change it, because attitudes can be changed. And if we get that message across, we will simply have a lot less people dying or in my position, and that would be a thoroughly good thing. It might sound idealistic, but it can be done because attitudes can be changed.
I'd like to thank all my guests for their important input into this panel discussion on cycling in London. James Moore, Associate Business Editor at The Independent. Dr. German Dector-Vega, Sustrans Director for London, and Michael Hodges, Executive Editor of Time Out in London.